In today's video, I'll be building the 20mm anti-aircraft guns. These guns consist of 12 photo-etch parts and 1 resin part. This is the most numerous part in the kit. There are 13 of these gun mounts, and the kit provides sufficient parts to build 16 of them. The additional 3 are likely provided so that these parts can be shared with other Littorio class models. In other ships of this class, or the Roma in a different configuration, there are additional mounts and places that will be covered by boats in this model. Although these parts are numerous, fortunately they are not nearly as complicated as the 40mm guns that I built in the previous video. That being said, there are some small and tricky components, and there are just a lot of components. There are a total of 169 pieces that need to be assembled for these guns. This is the third and last type of anti-aircraft gun that will be assembled for the ship. Therefore, this will also be the last video in the series of construction of anti-aircraft guns. I'm very glad to have the anti-aircraft guns behind me. They are tedious and time-consuming to build, and also quite tricky. I don't like building them, so I'm always glad when they are completed. I'm going to start with part E12. This is a structure that is stuck onto the rear of the mount and has a cage that sits on top of it with some controls. I think this is a location where one of the gunners would sit and operate the gun. To fold these parts, I start by bending this curved section on the shaft of a precision screwdriver. The metal is very malleable because lines have been etched into the curved section to assist with the bending. Once the panel has the appropriate curve, I fold the sides of the box into place. These guns are of Italian design, built by the Breda company. These guns were designed in 1935 with this specific variant known as the 20mm/65 model 1935. That is the naval stabilized twin mount variant. Because this is a very small part and it'll hold its shape quite well, I won't apply glue at this time, so I'll set them aside for use later on. These guns were primarily used by the Regia Marina as deck-mounted anti-aircraft weapons on their warships. This gun was considered to be an efficient weapon, however, it was considered to be inferior to the Oerlikon 20mm cannons. Next I will fold the tubs. This is the structure onto which all the parts of the gun will be connected, and it is also the largest part of the guns. First, I fold the side walls upwards into their correct position. This will get them out of the way and make it easier to fold the curved floor at the front of the tub. The side walls make it very difficult to get a cylinder into place to bend the floor, so I'll make the bend by hand with tweezers. As with the previous part, lines have been etched into the curved section. Starting at the base and moving outwards, I place a small bend on each line to match the curve as indicated by the side walls. After curving the floor, I bend the remaining walls into position. At this stage, I did not apply any glue. It's not necessary to stick photo etch parts together immediately. The metal will hold its shape quite well. For the continuity of the video, I've decided to edit it to move straight on to the gluing stage for these parts. If I had glued it as I folded it, this could have been done in one step. I'm using extra thin super glue applied with a wire. I am placing the glue on the inside of the part on the joins. By applying the glue on the inside, I'll conceal the marks from the glue as much as possible, while also reducing the risk of covering the fine detail with excess glue. Part E9 is an almost disc-like structure that holds the guns. This part just needs to be folded in half and glued together. This is likely the most simple part of these guns to build. To glue them together, I will once again use extra thin super glue applied with a piece of wire. After picking up some glue, I touch the wire to the seam line and let capillary action draw the glue between the two sides. This is a quick and easy job. Before I can start sticking the parts into the tabs, I need to install a disc underneath it. I don't want to be working underneath the mount with details attached to the top side. That is just a recipe to damage the parts that have been glued on. These discs have little holes to stick out of them that are very poorly formed. I suspect these poles are supposed to go into the holes in the deck to help properly center the anti-aircraft guns, but the problem is that they are so poorly formed it is going to obstruct that process, and there's no way to sufficiently clean them up. So what I'll do is cut off the poles and sand the discs so that they have a flat surface. When it comes to positioning them on the deck, I'll have to do it by eye, but at least there'll be a smooth surface for the mount to sit on. Next, I'll fold a small box with controls on it. These are the smallest boxes that need to be folded. All that is required is 4 simple folds to bring all of the sides to right angles to each other. Because this part is so small, it's difficult to hold and I drop it from time to time. The trick is to not let this part escape the table, otherwise it will be very difficult to find on the floor. After recording the previous video, I realized that I needed to try something different for this video. The previous video got quite chaotic. There was a lot to cover in that video and it required extensive editing. It was very time consuming to create. So based on the lessons from that video, I've made some changes to my process to reduce the amount of editing to make it quicker and easier. The essence of what I'm trying to do is keep as much of the video as possible in the final cut. The less I have to remove, the quicker the process becomes. Since I'm now able to record such that almost all of the video is usable, I have been able to greatly speed up the editing. All I did for this video clip was find the beginning and end of the clip, and then one representative section to cut out, and then the rest I just sped up. The result of that is that I don't have to watch through all of the footage at low speed. Since I have the glue out, I'll apply it now to hold the photo etch firmly in place. The most notable difference between how I'm editing this video now and how I edited it in previous videos is that for this video, I will not be cutting out the majority of the video. I'll just be speeding it up many times. Speeding it up many times is considerably easier than trying to cut it out, and I hope it will have a better effect. Assembly can now begin. First, I'll apply thick super glue to the base of the tub at the point where I want to attach the resin disc, and then I place the resin disc on top of the thick super glue and use tweezers to move it into position. After a short period, the glue sets and holds the disc firmly in place. Next, I will install the structure that holds the guns. I use a wire to pick up thick super glue, and I apply it to the groove that is etched into the base of the tub. I use tweezers to position the part, ensuring that it is correctly seated in the etched groove and that it is standing vertically. After letting the thick glue dry for a few moments, I came back with thin super glue and I applied it to the top of the mount to reinforce the vertical seam. After applying the glue, I fold a small bar into position and that caps off the top of the mount. At this point, it has become apparent that I need to do some planning. This cage, once folded, needs to have the ends an appropriate distance apart from each other, and there is a narrow end which is also offset that needs to sit on the curved structure that I folded at the beginning of this video. Because of these complications, I need to make sure that the curved part is stuck on in the correct location. If it is stuck on in the incorrect location, then the narrow end of the cage will be out of alignment and miss the point where it must be connected. I also need to select the correct radius for the curve on the cage so that the vertical supports are a correct distance apart from each other. Because there are a number of unknowns with how to complete this part of the build, I will install these parts on one of the mounts in the locations where I think they should go, and once I'm happy with their position, I'll replicate it on the other 12 mounts. The test fit went well, so I'll proceed with sticking down all of the E12 parts. I'm using extra thick superglue applied to the tub in the location where I want the part to be attached. I then bring the part into contact with the glue and ensure that it is in the correct position. Since almost all of the footage is in the final cut, I've been able to introduce a timer to help the viewer gauge how long the build takes. In the top right corner there is a timer that runs at the speed of the video clip being played. Most of the video is played back at 2 times speed, with hyperlapse played back at 64 times speed. This timer only represents the on-screen time. It does not include the planning, setup, and cleaning time. That would probably add another 1 to 2 hours to the clock. I now want to install all of the cages, so they need to be removed from the sprue and folded. During the test fit, I figured out the correct radius for the curve, so it's just a matter of bending them against the pre-selected precision screwdriver. To fill some of the gaps, I'm also going to give you some information on these guns. The guns had a rate of fire of 240 rounds per minute, with a practical rate of fire of about 120 rounds per minute. The guns fired a high explosive projectile with a weight of 134 grams at a muzzle velocity of 840 meters per second. The effective range was 2,500 meters with an AA ceiling of 2,900 meters. Roughly 1,500 rounds were stored per gun, and the barrel had a life of roughly 5,000 rounds. The folded cages can now be installed in the mounts. Normally I'd apply the superglue to the long end first because it will have a stronger bond, and then attach the narrow end. But in this case, it's important for the narrow end to be precisely positioned on part E12 that juts out from the back of the mount. So in this case, what I'm going to do is stick the narrow end on first to ensure that it is in the correct location, and then the wide end second. There's much more play on the wide end, so it'll be easier to do it this way around. I'll start by applying the thick superglue to E12 where the short end of the cage will be attached, and I bring the parts into contact with each other. If necessary, I reinforce the bond with thin superglue. Small adjustments are then required to bring the long end into its correct position. Once it is in its correct position, I use thin superglue to stick it in place. Next, I'll install E11. E11 is stuck on the left side at the back of the mount, with about half of the part jutting out. I'm using thick superglue to stick it down. Staying at the back of the mount, the next part to install is a small platform. This part does not require any folding. It just needs to be cut off the sprue and glued to the back of the mount as indicated by the green line. Once again, I'm using extra thick superglue to glue this part in place. The last piece to be attached to the back of the mount is what I think is the gun commander's chair. This part is considerably easier to work with than the chairs on the 40mm guns. They have a much wider point to make the connection to the mount, and the structure is not nearly as complicated. All that needs to be done is for a few folds to be placed on the part. I've left one end of the chair attached to the sprue to assist with holding small pieces while bending them. When the chairs have been bent into the correct shape, I cut them off the sprue so that they are ready to be installed on the mount. I use extra thick superglue applied to the base of the chair to stick it to the mount. There is no detail at the base of the chair, so I use it to pick up the glue directly and bring the part into contact with the mount. The final piece to be installed on the mount is a very small part that looks like a flag, but isn't really a flag. I'm not sure what it is. Although the instructions indicate that this part should be stuck to E12 before attaching it to the mount, I think that would be a mistake. As you have seen, the mount has been handled quite extensively, and it certainly would have been knocked off. Now that the cage is installed, it is also apparent that F3 will be in contact with one of the bars of the cage. I can use that bar to give F3 extra support. To tack F3 in place, I dip the pole in thick superglue and then position it on the mount, and then apply thin superglue to the pole that it is touching to create a strong bond. With the installation of those pieces, the mount is complete. These parts will be sprayed in light grey. I will now move on to constructing the guns. The guns will be painted in black, that is why I have not yet installed them. For the guns, I'm going to start by constructing the block to which the barrels will be attached. These blocks, along with the barrels, are the most numerous parts in the kit. Since there are 13 of these mounts, and each mount has 2 guns, I need to construct 26 of these parts. Something to note about these blocks that's a bit strange is that they don't have a panel at the bottom, it's open. This has an advantage and a disadvantage. On the one hand, it weakens the part because there's less support at the bottom, but on the other hand, it makes construction a bit quicker because you have easy access to the joints to apply glue from the inside. Building 26 parts is tedious, building more than 20 of anything is tedious, but this isn't difficult, it's just time consuming. Although these parts are small, they are large enough to be folded in hand with tweezers. The wings that stick out of the side help with aligning the walls of the block, which makes getting everything into place quite easy. Once the sides are in position, I fix them in place with extra thin superglue applied with a piece of wire to the inside of the part. I found the barrel for these 20mm guns to be a bit strange. If you compare them to the 40mm guns, you'll notice that they are folded while the 40mm gun barrels are not. Why is it that the photo etch that is supposed to represent the smaller caliber barrel is folded and therefore has a wider barrel than what should be the larger caliber barrel? Anyways, setting aside that bit of strangeness, these barrels are quite simple to fold. The connection between each half is quite thin, so while they fold easily, it's also easy to get them out of alignment. You just need to watch out for that. Another advantage of the weak connections is that you can fold these parts with tweezers. There's no need to get out the photo etch folding tool. I find folding with tweezers to be quicker than using the folding tool, so typically I only bring out the tool for the more tricky parts. Although there are 26 of these parts to work through, the process is easy and it goes quickly. The final step for the construction of these guns is to attach the barrel to the block. Unlike the barrels for the 40mm guns, there isn't a hole etched into the side of the block for the barrels. They have to be stuck directly onto the face in a similar fashion to how the seats were installed. Although this is not ideal, the folded photo etch surface is fairly large at the base of the barrel, and that increases the surface area for the glue. Without a hole, you do need to be a little bit careful about where you position the barrel to ensure that it is correctly centered. I stick the base of the barrel to the block using extra thick superglue. As with the other steps in building these guns, construction goes quite quickly, and it doesn't take long before all 26 guns are assembled and ready for painting. The color scheme for these guns is the same as for the other anti-aircraft guns on the ship. That is, the mount will be painted in light grey and the guns will be painted in black. I'm going to paint the guns first by spraying them with Tamiya XF1. I stuck all of these guns onto a piece of masking tape upside down so that I can spray the underneath first. Although these guns don't have a cover on the underside of them, they still need to be painted from underneath. Otherwise, from certain angles, you might be able to see up into the underside and view unpainted metal. After the paint on the underside dried, I flipped them over so the top could be painted. An unfortunate consequence of using black paint is that it will conceal details. I'll need to lighten up these pieces with light grey panel line to help bring out the detail. Next, I painted the mounts in light grey. This is a 50-50 combination of Tamiya XF2 and XF19. This is the same color as the light grey used in the camouflage on this ship. The trick with painting these parts is to ensure that the paint gets onto all the surfaces. Since the shape of these parts is quite complex, I need to make sure that I come at it from all angles. I need to spray it from the side of the card so that I can reach the surfaces that are facing down. After letting the color coat dry for a few hours, the paint can be sealed in with X22. X22 is a varnish, so it has a harder finish than regular paint. This will help protect the part from scratches. The gloss varnish will also help with the application of panel line. The smooth finish will enable the panel line to flow towards the detail more easily. It also helps with removing the panel line from the undetailed surfaces. If enamel paint has been used for the color coat, the acrylic varnish will seal it in and protect it from the panel line, which is also an enamel-based paint. Mineral turpentine, or white spirits, is used to remove the panel line, and it will also remove enamel paint. After letting the varnish dry for roughly a day, the panel line can be applied. For guns painted in black, I'm using light grey panel line. The intention is for the light grey panel line to highlight some of the details while keeping the part black. Precision is not required for this process. The panel line can be generously applied onto the parts. The excess panel line will be cleaned up with mineral turpentine. For the mounts, which are painted in light grey, I'm using black panel line. I'm trying to apply as little panel line as possible because I don't want to have to remove too much of it later on. These parts are very small and delicate, so I want to handle them as little as possible. Due to the complex shape of these parts, I'm trying to come at them from multiple angles, as I did when spraying them in the light grey, so that I can get all of the detail highlighted. After letting the panel line dry on these parts for around 10 minutes, the excess can be removed. To remove the panel line, I use a brush lightly wet with turpentine and I brush it across the part. I repeat this process until I achieve the effect that I'm looking for. Once the panel line has dried, final construction can begin. The most tricky part of this construction is getting the wings on the block of the guns through the small holes in the disc that holds them to the mount. Because the disc is installed inside the mount, it makes access to those holes quite difficult. I'm finding it tricky to get the gun inside the slot. The side of the mount is in the way, and that's obstructing the wing of the gun from going through the hole. This would be a lot easier if the disc was not installed in the mount. After a bit of handling, I managed to get it in, although with all this handling, I did knock off the cage. That can be easily reattached, so I'm not worried about that. The first attempt is always going to be a bit of a learning experience. Once I've figured out how to install all the guns in the smoothest way possible, I'll replicate it on the other mounts. Once I have worked the gun into position, I use extra thin super glue to tack it in place. The second gun, which is mounted slightly higher on the other side of the disc, is easier to install. There is more space to work, but I did knock off the barrel on my first attempt. You need to insert it from a specific angle, and I didn't get the angle quite right that time. So I'll just pick up another barrel and try again. Once seated in the correct position, I use thin super glue to tack it in place. This installation is a bit trickier than I would like it to be. That is mostly because of the different color of the paint on the mount and the guns dictating the order in which the parts must be glued together. It would have been easier to install the guns on the disc and then install the disc with the guns attached into the mount. The problem is that there's a cap that is bent over the top of the disc. That would have had to have been left open. This would have prevented the cage from being installed, which then prevents the detail around the cage from being installed. The knock-on effect results in a lot of small pieces needing to be painted individually. I think that would have been worse. Although this is tricky, it's not impossible. Now that the barrels are in, I need to replace the cage on this part. The small flag-like part is still attached to the cage, and the cage is in the correct shape, so reinstallation is easy. 1 down, 12 to go. The twin mounting fitted guns were placed next to each other, with the left gun placed on a level above the right gun, so as to clear the horizontal ammunition feeding port. An unusual feature of these guns was that after firing, the spent round was reinserted into the magazine instead of being ejected. The rounds had an elevation of -10 degrees to +90 degrees. And finally, to complete the construction of these guns, I will mat them down with Color 182. As with painting these parts with the color coat and gloss varnish, The trick is to spray it from all angles such that you can reach into all the gaps and the surfaces that are facing downwards. Mr. Color 182 has a strong matte effect, so a little goes a long way. If you overdo it, you'll get a white frosting effect. If you do get that frosting, you can remove it by spraying the model with Mr. Color Rapid Thinner. If you do that, just be careful that you don't spray on too much, otherwise you could dissolve the underlying paint and ruin the model. Once the matte coat has dried, installation on the ship can begin. Before putting any glue on the model, I'm doing a test fit with one of the parts, just to make sure that it has good clearance and sits well. After the successful test fit, I apply thick super glue to the model using a toothpick and place the gun on top of the glue. Before the glue sets, I use tweezers to position the mount into the correct location and orientation. The same process is then completed another 12 times as I work my way around the ship, installing all of the guns. This brings us to the end of the video. In the next video, I'll begin constructing the boats. The ship has a lot of boats. There are over 20 and they come in a few varieties. After the boats, it's only the aircraft and rigging left on the ship to do. Thanks for watching. Cheers.